Standing in my designer kitchen staring at the desperate faces of my mother and sister through my security camera, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. 23 years ago, they called me their biggest mistake and threw me out like garbage. Now here they were, mascara streaming down their cheeks, begging at my door. My name is Seraphina, and this is how I discovered that sometimes the family that destroys you becomes the very foundation of your greatest triumph. But what they did not know yet was that I had been watching, waiting, and planning for this exact moment. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you are ready to hear how karma served the coldest dish of justice, smash that like button and subscribe for more shocking family drama stories. Trust me, you will want to stick around because what my family did next will leave you speechless. My story begins in the suffocating suburbs of Ohio, where I grew up as the unwanted third daughter of Margaret and Robert Sullivan. While my sisters Isabella and Victoria basked in our parents' approval, I was constantly reminded that I was an accident, a burden, a mistake that derailed their perfect family plans. My mother never missed an opportunity to compare me unfavorably to my accomplished sisters who excelled in everything from academics to beauty pageants. The breaking point came during my 17th birthday dinner. Instead of celebrating, my mother stood up with a glass of wine and announced to our extended family that I was the reason she never achieved her dreams of becoming a real estate mogul. She claimed my unexpected arrival forced her to abandon her career aspirations, unlike my sisters, who were planned and wanted. The room fell silent as she declared me the family mistake, suggesting I should consider emancipation since I was clearly unhappy living under their roof. That night, I packed my belongings, while my father sat silently in his chair, offering no defense. My sisters watched from the staircase, neither protesting nor showing any sign of sympathy. With $200 in my pocket and a fierce determination burning in my chest, I walked out of that house and never looked back. I spent my senior year sleeping on friends' couches, working double shifts at a local diner, and maintaining perfect grades because I refused to let their cruelty define my future. What I discovered years later through private investigators would shake the very foundation of everything I believed about my family's treatment of me. During my childhood, my maternal grandmother had established a substantial trust fund specifically for me, her beloved granddaughter, Seraphina, worth over $2 million. This trust was meant to be accessible when I turned 18, with clear instructions that I should be informed of its existence on my 16th birthday. The devastating truth emerged through financial records and legal documents. My parents had been receiving detailed annual statements about my trust fund, watching it grow through careful investments and compound interest. They knew exactly how much money awaited me, and they had deliberately concealed this information, hoping to maintain control over my life and potentially access the funds themselves through manipulation and emotional dependence. But their greed ran deeper than mere concealment. Through forensic accounting, I uncovered a sophisticated scheme of financial manipulation that had been ongoing since my grandmother's death when I was 12. My parents had somehow gained limited access to the trust's quarterly distributions, which were meant to cover my educational expenses and general welfare. Instead of using these funds for my benefit, they had systematically diverted the money into their own accounts, financing my sister's private school educations, dance lessons, and extravagant Sweet 16 parties. The most heartbreaking discovery was a series of letters my grandmother had written to me before her death letters that were supposed to be delivered annually, starting on my 13th birthday. These letters contained not only expressions of her unconditional love, but also detailed explanations about the trust fund, her hopes for my future, and her specific instructions that I should never feel financially dependent on anyone. My parents had intercepted and hidden every single letter, robbing me of my grandmother's final gift of emotional support and financial independence. The financial manipulation extended beyond simple theft. My parents had used my trust fund distributions to make down payments on investment properties, which they then flipped for substantial profits. They had essentially used my inheritance as seed money for their own real estate ventures while simultaneously telling me I was a financial burden on the family. The irony was suffocating. They were building wealth using my money while convincing me I was worthless. As I pieced together this betrayal through bank statements and legal documents, I realized their cruelty had been calculated and premeditated. They had not rejected me because I was unplanned or unwanted. They had systematically destroyed my self-worth to prevent me from questioning my circumstances or discovering my inheritance. Their emotional abuse was a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to keep me subservient and unaware of my true financial situation. The discovery hit me like a physical blow. Every birthday where I received generic gifts while my sisters got expensive jewelry every Christmas, where I was given secondhand clothes while they received designer items, every family vacation I was excluded from due to budget constraints. All of it was funded by money that rightfully belonged to me. They had not just stolen my inheritance, they had stolen my childhood sense of security and belonging. Armed with this devastating knowledge and a Harvard MBA earned through scholarships and relentless determination, I began planning my methodical approach to justice. By age 35, I had built a successful consulting firm specializing in family wealth management and estate planning, ironically becoming an expert in the very systems my parents had used to defraud me. My client base included high net worth families who trusted me to protect their legacies completely, unaware that I was simultaneously unraveling the destruction of my own. The first phase of my strategy involved rebuilding connections with family members who had been manipulated or excluded from the truth. I reached out to my great aunt Cordelia, my grandmother's sister, who had always seemed suspicious of my parents' explanations for my sudden departure from family gatherings. During a carefully orchestrated lunch meeting, I presented her with copies of all the financial documents I had discovered, watching her face transform from confusion to horror to righteous anger. Cordelia revealed additional pieces of the puzzle that made my parents' betrayal even more sinister. She explained that my grandmother had specifically chosen me as the primary beneficiary because she recognized signs of favoritism and emotional abuse within our household. My grandmother had confided in Cordelia about her concerns regarding my parents' treatment of me, expressing fears that I would be pushed aside in favor of my more conventionally successful sisters. Together, Cordelia and I discovered that my grandmother had also established a secondary trust fund, managed through a different financial institution, containing an additional $800,000 meant to be revealed to me on my 21st birthday. This fund had remained untouched because my parents were unaware of its existence, but the bank had been sending annual notifications to their address letters they had presumably discarded without investigation. The legal implications became clear when Cordelia introduced me to Harrison Blackwood, the estate attorney who had originally executed my grandmother's will. Harrison was appalled to learn about my parents' deception and immediately began building a comprehensive case for trust fund fraud, elder abuse, and breach of fiduciary duty. His investigation revealed that my parents had forged my signature on multiple documents, claiming I had authorized them to manage my finances during my minority and temporary absence from the family. But I was not interested in simply recovering my stolen money. I wanted my parents to experience the same sense of betrayal, abandonment, and financial desperation they had forced me to endure. Through my business connections, I learned that my parents had been using their real estate profits to maintain an increasingly expensive lifestyle, including a vacation home in the Hamptons and luxury vehicles they could barely afford through extended financing arrangements. My strategy involved systematically exposing their fraudulent activities to every institution and individual who had enabled or unknowingly participated in their scheme. I filed detailed complaints with the bank that had managed my trust fund, highlighting their failure to verify my parents' authority and their negligent handling of a minor's protected assets. I contacted the Internal Revenue Service with evidence of unreported income and potential tax evasion related to their use of my trust fund distributions. The most devastating blow came when I approached the real estate clients my parents had been cultivating for their investment business. Through carefully crafted conversations and strategic information sharing, I revealed that their seed money for property investments had been obtained through theft from a minor child. Several clients immediately withdrew their partnerships, demanding full explanations and threatening their own legal action. I also reached out to my sisters now married with children of their own, presenting them with irrefutable evidence of how their privileged upbringing had been financed through theft from their younger sister. The conversation with Isabella, always the more sensitive of my two sisters, resulted in tears and immediate offers to make amends. Victoria, however, dismissed my evidence as bitter jealousy and accused me of trying to destroy the family out of spite. The confrontation I had been building toward finally arrived when I sent my parents a formal legal notice demanding full restitution of stolen funds, plus interest and damages within 30 days. The notice was delivered by a courier to their home on a Tuesday morning, accompanied by copies of all the evidence I had accumulated over months of investigation. My mother called within hours, her voice shaking with a combination of rage and terror. She denied everything, initially claiming I was fabricating documents and attempting extortion. But when I calmly read aloud from her own bank statements and quoted specific amounts and dates of fraudulent transactions, her denials crumbled into desperate bargaining. She offered partial restitution, claiming they could not possibly repay the full amount without selling their primary residence and liquidating their retirement accounts. I listened to her pleading with the same cold detachment she had shown when calling me a mistake and throwing me out of her house. When she finished her desperate monologue, I simply said I would see them in court and hung up. The formal legal proceedings began within 2 weeks, with Harrison filing a comprehensive lawsuit that included not only financial fraud, but also intentional infliction of emotional distress and conspiracy charges. The local newspaper picked up the story, running a front-page article about prominent community members accused of stealing their own daughter's inheritance and using the money to fund their lavish lifestyle. The legal battle intensified as more family members and community members learned about the shocking details of my parents' betrayal. What began as a straightforward case of financial fraud evolved into a broader investigation that revealed patterns of manipulation and abuse that had been hidden for decades. I found myself at the center of a growing network of allies who had their own reasons for seeking justice against my parents' carefully constructed facade of respectability. My great-aunt Cordelia became my most vocal advocate, using her connections within the local social scene to ensure that the story spread throughout the community, where my parents had built their reputation. She organized informal gatherings where other family members shared their own stories of my parents' questionable behavior, creating a coalition of relatives who had been marginalized or deceived over the years. During one particularly revealing family meeting, my cousin Marcus disclosed that my parents had borrowed significant amounts of money from various relatives over the years, always promising repayment that never materialized. He had documentation showing loans totaling over $50,000 that my parents had solicited for supposed family emergencies, money that had apparently been used for their real estate investments rather than the medical bills and home repairs they had claimed to need funding for. The most unexpected ally emerged when Isabella, my middle sister, reached out privately to offer her full support for my legal case. During a tearful 3-hour conversation at a neutral location, she revealed that she had always felt guilty about the family's treatment of me, but had been too young and afraid to intervene. She explained that our parents had explicitly told her and Victoria that I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous, warning them against maintaining contact with me after I left home. Isabella's revelation that our parents had systematically poisoned my sisters against me added another dimension to their betrayal. She provided me with screenshots of text messages and emails where our mother had continued to spread lies about my supposed instability and potential threats to family harmony. These communications proved that their campaign against me had continued long after I left home, designed to prevent any future reconciliation that might lead to questions about my missing inheritance. Through Isabella's cooperation, I gained access to family financial records that had been stored in their shared safe deposit box. These documents revealed even more extensive fraud than I had originally discovered, including forged beneficiary changes on life insurance policies and unauthorized modifications to my grandmother's will that had somehow been processed after her death. My legal team expanded to include a forensic accountant and a specialist in elder abuse cases, as the evidence suggested that my parents had also manipulated my grandmother's finances during her final years. The accountant discovered a pattern of large withdrawals from my grandmother's accounts in the months before her death transactions that coincided with my parents' first real estate purchases. But the most crucial ally in my growing network was someone completely unexpected: Jennifer Walsh, a former bank employee who had processed many of the transactions related to my trust fund during her tenure in the private wealth management division. Jennifer had been terminated from her position after raising concerns about irregular activity on several minor beneficiary accounts, including mine. Jennifer contacted me through Harrison after reading about the lawsuit in local news coverage. She revealed that she had maintained copies of internal bank communications that showed multiple employees questioning the legitimacy of my parents' access to my trust fund. Her documentation proved that the bank had ignored red flags and failed to follow proper verification procedures, making them liable for enabling the fraud. Her evidence also revealed that my parents had attempted to access the secondary trust fund I had been unaware of, but had been blocked by additional security measures my grandmother had specifically requested. Jennifer had been the employee who insisted on enhanced verification for that account, likely saving hundreds of thousands of dollars from being stolen, along with the rest of my inheritance. As word of the lawsuit spread through business and social networks, other victims of my parents' financial manipulation began coming forward. 3 families revealed that my parents had used fraudulent financial statements to secure investment partnerships, claiming assets and liquidity they did not actually possess. These families had lost substantial amounts of money in failed real estate ventures that my parents had mismanaged or abandoned. The growing coalition of victims and allies created a sense of momentum that began affecting my parents' daily lives in ways that went beyond the legal proceedings. Their country club membership was quietly revoked after multiple members complained about associating with accused fraudsters. Local businesses that had extended credit or professional courtesy began demanding immediate payment of outstanding balances. My mother attempted to control the narrative by reaching out to mutual acquaintances and extended family members, claiming that I was vindictively attacking them with false accusations motivated by childhood resentments. However, the extensive documentation and multiple witness testimonies made her denials increasingly implausible to anyone who examined the evidence objectively. The psychological pressure on my parents became evident when my father suffered what appeared to be a stress-related health episode requiring hospitalization for chest pains that were ultimately diagnosed as severe anxiety. During his recovery, nurses reported that he had made rambling statements about needing to make amends with his daughter before something terrible happened to the family. My mother's attempts to maintain her social standing became increasingly desperate as former friends and associates distanced themselves from the scandal. She began making unannounced visits to relatives' homes, seeking support and loans to help fund their legal defense. These visits often ended in arguments when relatives confronted her with evidence of her deception and demanded explanations for years of lies. The legal discovery process revealed that my parents had been living beyond their means for years, using credit and borrowed money to maintain the appearance of success while their actual financial situation deteriorated. Their real estate investments had been largely unsuccessful, with several properties entering foreclosure procedures that they had hidden from family and friends. As the pressure mounted, I received indirect messages through family members suggesting that my parents were willing to negotiate a settlement rather than face a public trial. However, I had moved beyond simple financial recovery. I wanted full accountability and public acknowledgement of what they had done to me and to other family members who had trusted them. The alliance I had built created a support system that strengthened my resolve to see the case through to its conclusion. Each new piece of evidence and each additional witness testimony reinforced my belief that exposing the truth was not just about personal justice, but about protecting future victims from my parents' manipulative and fraudulent behavior. The devastating blow I never saw coming arrived on a rain-soaked Thursday morning when Harrison called with news that would temporarily shatter everything I had built. Victoria, my eldest sister, who I thought had simply been manipulated by our parents, had been secretly working against me from the beginning of the legal proceedings. She had not only been feeding information to our parents' legal team, but had also been actively attempting to discredit my case through a sophisticated campaign of evidence tampering and witness intimidation. The betrayal ran deeper than simple family loyalty. Through intercepted communications that Harrison's private investigator had discovered, we learned that Victoria had entered into a secret financial agreement with our parents months before I had even filed the lawsuit. They had promised her 50% of any money they managed to retain through legal maneuvering, plus immediate access to family properties and assets if she could successfully undermine my case. Victoria had been exploiting her position as my seemingly supportive sister to gather intelligence about my legal strategy, my evidence, and my emotional vulnerabilities. Every family gathering, where she had expressed sympathy for my situation, every private conversation where she had encouraged me to seek justice, had been carefully orchestrated to extract information that she could pass along to our parents' defense team. The most shocking revelation was that Victoria had convinced Isabella to provide her with access to the family documents that had been crucial to building my case. She had then selectively copied and altered several key pieces of evidence, creating versions that supported our parents' claims that I had been informed about the trust fund and had voluntarily allowed them to manage my finances during my absence from the family. Her manipulation extended to the witnesses who had been supporting my case. Victoria had approached several family members privately, including our cousin Marcus, suggesting that their testimony against our parents could result in criminal charges that might affect their own financial situations. She implied that anyone who testified against our parents could be investigated for their own potential involvement in family financial matters, creating fear and uncertainty among my supporters. The most devastating aspect of Victoria's betrayal was her attempt to weaponize my mental health history against me. She had contacted the family doctor who had treated me for depression during my teenage years, requesting copies of my medical records that she then provided to our parents' attorneys. She was building a case that I was mentally unstable and prone to delusions, suggesting that my accusations of financial fraud were manifestations of psychological problems rather than factual claims. Victoria had also been working to undermine Jennifer Walsh's credibility as a witness, spreading rumors in professional circles that Jennifer had been terminated from the bank for her own ethical violations, rather than for trying to protect my interests. She had contacted Jennifer's current employer with fabricated concerns about her integrity, attempting to pressure her into withdrawing her support for my case. The betrayal became personal when I discovered that Victoria had been secretly recording our private conversations using a sophisticated app on her phone. She had hours of audio recordings of me discussing my legal strategy, my emotional struggles with the family situation, and my plans for how to use any recovered money to help other family members who had been victims of our parents' manipulation. During a particularly painful confrontation, Victoria revealed the extent of her calculated deception. She explained that she had never believed my accusations against our parents, despite the overwhelming evidence, because accepting the truth would mean acknowledging that her own privileged upbringing had been built on theft and fraud. She had chosen to protect her memories and her relationship with our parents, rather than support justice for me. Her betrayal had immediate practical consequences that threatened to derail my entire case. Several family members who had been supporting my legal efforts began questioning whether they wanted to be involved in what Victoria was now characterizing as a vindictive family feud rather than a legitimate fraud case. The unity that had been building among my allies started to fracture as people became uncertain about who to trust and what to believe. The altered evidence that Victoria had provided to our parents' legal team created confusion during depositions and discovery proceedings. Harrison was forced to spend weeks re-authenticating documents and rebuilding parts of the case that had been compromised by Victoria's interference. The delays and complications gave our parents' attorneys time to develop more sophisticated defense strategies. My confidence began to waver as I realized that I had been fighting not just against my parents' fraud, but against a coordinated family conspiracy that included someone I had trusted with my most vulnerable emotions. The psychological impact of Victoria's betrayal was worse than the original financial crimes because it represented a deliberate choice to inflict additional harm on someone who had already suffered enough. The legal team advised me that Victoria's interference had weakened our case significantly, though not fatally. We would need to rebuild trust with witnesses, re-establish the authenticity of key evidence, and find new ways to corroborate my claims without relying on family members who might be compromised or intimidated. During this dark period, I questioned whether pursuing justice was worth the continued emotional devastation. Victoria's betrayal had reminded me that my family was capable of inflicting new wounds, even when I thought I had already experienced the worst of their cruelty. The isolation I felt was profound as I realized that I truly had no reliable family connections left to support me through this ordeal. The temporary defeat felt complete when our parents' attorneys filed a motion claiming that my case was based on fabricated evidence and motivated by mental instability. They cited Victoria's recordings and altered documents as proof that I was unable to distinguish between reality and delusion. The motion requested that the case be dismissed and that I be required to undergo psychological evaluation before being allowed to pursue any further legal action. As I sat in Harrison's office reviewing the devastating motion that could end my pursuit of justice, I felt the same helplessness and abandonment that I had experienced 23 years earlier when my mother called me a mistake and threw me out of the house. Victoria's betrayal had succeeded in making me question not only my legal case, but my own perception of reality and my worthiness of support from anyone. Just when my case seemed destined for failure, salvation arrived from the most unexpected source. Thomas Ashford, my grandmother's original financial advisor, who had been presumed dead for over a decade. Thomas had actually been living in quiet retirement in Arizona, completely unaware of the fraud that had been committed against my inheritance until he read about the lawsuit in a financial industry newsletter that covered significant estate fraud cases. Thomas contacted Harrison immediately, explaining that he possessed copies of every original document related to my grandmother's estate planning, including detailed instructions about how and when I should be informed about my inheritance. More importantly, he had maintained audio recordings of conversations with my grandmother, where she explicitly discussed her concerns about my parents' treatment of me and her determination to protect my financial future from their potential interference. The recordings were devastating evidence that completely contradicted my parents' claims that they had been authorized to manage my finances. In clear, unambiguous language, my grandmother had instructed Thomas to ensure that my parents never gained access to any portion of my inheritance, specifically because she distrusted their motivations and their treatment of me. She had even predicted that they might attempt to manipulate or deceive me about the trust fund's existence. Thomas also revealed that he had helped my grandmother establish additional protective measures that neither my parents nor their attorneys were aware of. She had created a separate documentation system with a different law firm, complete with backup copies of her will and trust documents that could not be altered or tampered with by anyone attempting to commit fraud against her estate. His testimony provided crucial context for every suspicious transaction and questionable decision that my parents had made regarding my inheritance. Thomas was able to explain the specific security protocols that should have been followed, the verification procedures that had been ignored, and the red flags that multiple institutions had overlooked when allowing my parents access to my protected funds. But Thomas brought more than just evidence. He brought connections to other professionals who had been involved in managing my grandmother's affairs. Through his network, we discovered that my grandmother had also worked with a private investigator during her final years, someone she had hired to document my parents' financial activities and gather evidence of any potential misconduct that might threaten my inheritance. The private investigator, Maria Santos, had maintained her files despite the passage of time, believing that the evidence might eventually be needed to protect my interests. Her surveillance records showed my parents making large cash deposits and unusual financial transactions during the months immediately following my grandmother's death activity that corresponded perfectly with the timeline of their theft from my trust fund. Maria's investigation had also uncovered evidence that my parents had been planning their fraud for years before my grandmother's death. She had documentation of conversations where they discussed ways to gain control of family assets and minimize my potential inheritance. This evidence proved that their abuse and eventual rejection of me had been motivated by financial greed rather than genuine family conflict. The new evidence completely undermined Victoria's attempt to portray me as mentally unstable and prone to fabricating accusations. Thomas and Maria provided independent professional verification of every major claim I had made about my parents' fraudulent behavior. Their credentials and documentation were unimpeachable, making it impossible for my parents' attorneys to dismiss the case as family drama or psychological delusion. Thomas's involvement also revealed additional crimes that we had not previously discovered. He showed us evidence that my parents had attempted to forge my grandmother's signature on documents that would have given them broader access to family assets. They had also tried to pressure my grandmother into changing her will during her final illness efforts that Thomas had documented and reported to elder abuse authorities at the time. The strength of the new evidence prompted several family members who had been intimidated by Victoria to return to supporting my case. Marcus provided additional financial records that he had been afraid to share earlier, and even some family friends came forward with stories about my parents' suspicious financial behavior that they had observed over the years. Isabella, who had been devastated by Victoria's betrayal, doubled her efforts to support my case by providing access to family computers and storage devices that contained years of email communications. These emails revealed ongoing discussions between my parents about managing and concealing information related to my inheritance, proving that their fraud had been deliberate and sustained rather than impulsive or accidental. The tide began to turn when Harrison filed an amended complaint that included the new evidence and additional charges related to the elder abuse and attempted forgery that Thomas had documented. The amended filing made front-page news again, this time focusing on the revelation that a presumed dead witness had emerged with evidence that completely validated the fraud victim's claims. My parents' attorneys attempted damage control by claiming that Thomas was unreliable due to his age and long absence from the case, but his meticulous record-keeping and professional reputation made such arguments ineffective. The audio recordings of my grandmother were particularly damaging because they captured her voice expressing specific concerns about my parents that had proven to be accurate. The psychological impact of gaining such powerful allies was profound. After months of feeling isolated and questioning my own perceptions, I finally had independent validation from respected professionals who had no personal stake in family dynamics. Thomas and Maria treated me with the respect and concern that I should have received from my family, acknowledging the severity of what had been done to me and committed to ensuring justice. Victoria's betrayal began to backfire as the strength of the new evidence made her interference appear petty and desperate rather than protective. Several family members who had initially been swayed by her arguments began to see her actions as part of the same pattern of manipulation and deception that characterized our parents' behavior. The momentum shift was dramatic. What had been a complicated family dispute with questionable evidence became a clear-cut case of financial fraud supported by overwhelming documentation and professional testimony. My parents' legal team began discussing settlement options, rather than continuing to fight charges that were becoming increasingly difficult to defend against. The final confrontation arrived exactly as I had envisioned it 23 years earlier when I walked out of their house with nothing but determination and $200. My parents stood at my front door, no longer the confident manipulators who had controlled every aspect of my childhood, but broken individuals whose carefully constructed lies had finally collapsed under the weight of undeniable truth. The court proceedings had concluded with a devastating judgment against my parents that included full restitution of my stolen inheritance, plus compound interest totaling over $4 million. Additionally, they faced criminal charges for elder abuse fraud and conspiracy that would likely result in prison sentences. Their assets were frozen pending the criminal investigation, and their reputation in the community was permanently destroyed. But the monetary victory was secondary to the complete vindication I felt watching them face consequences for their decades of cruelty and manipulation. The judge had specifically noted the calculated nature of their crimes, emphasizing that they had not simply made poor financial decisions, but had deliberately abused their position as parents to steal from their own child while systematically destroying her emotional well-being. Victoria faced her own legal consequences for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. Her attempts to undermine my case had been thoroughly documented, and she was charged as an accessory to fraud. The secret financial agreement she had made with our parents was deemed illegal, and she was required to forfeit any money she had received from them while cooperating with their defense. The broader family dynamics shifted dramatically as the truth spread throughout our extended network. Relatives who had been manipulated into believing negative stories about me began reaching out with apologies and offers to rebuild relationships. Many admitted that they had always felt uncomfortable with my parents' treatment of me, but had been afraid to challenge their version of events. Isabella emerged as a genuine ally and sister, using her portion of the family inheritance she had received legitimately to establish a foundation focused on protecting children from financial abuse within families. We worked together to create resources for young people who might be experiencing similar manipulation, ensuring that other victims would have support systems that I had been denied. Thomas Ashford became an unexpected father figure, someone who had genuinely cared about my grandmother's wishes and my welfare during years when my actual family had been plotting against me. He helped me understand my grandmother's true feelings about me and her hopes for my future, healing emotional wounds that went far beyond the financial crimes. Maria Santos and I developed a professional relationship that evolved into friendship as we worked together to identify other cases of inheritance fraud and family financial abuse. Her expertise and my lived experience created a powerful combination for helping other victims navigate complex legal and emotional challenges. The money I recovered allowed me to expand my consulting business into a nonprofit organization that provides free legal and financial services to victims of family fraud. We have helped dozens of individuals recover stolen inheritances and escape financially abusive family situations, creating the support network that I had wished for during my darkest moments. My parents' attempts to contact me after their conviction were consistently ignored. They had lost any right to my attention or forgiveness when they chose greed over their daughter's welfare. Their letters from prison, filled with excuses and requests for reconciliation, went directly into the trash without being read. The house where I had been called a mistake and thrown out like garbage was eventually sold to satisfy their legal debts. I purchased it through an intermediary, not out of nostalgia, but as a symbol of how completely our family power dynamics had shifted. The property now serves as a retreat center for young people aging out of foster care, providing the stability and support that every child deserves. The chosen family I built through this experience proved more loving and loyal than the biological family that had rejected me. Thomas Maria Harrison Isabella and the network of allies who had supported my fight for justice became the foundation of a life filled with genuine relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. Looking back on this journey, I realized that my parents' cruelest act was not stealing my money or calling me a mistake, but convincing me that I was unworthy of love and support. The greatest victory was not the financial recovery, but the discovery that I could build meaningful connections with people who valued honesty, integrity, and justice. The legal precedent set by my case has been cited in multiple subsequent inheritance fraud prosecutions, helping other victims receive justice and holding financial institutions accountable for their role in enabling family fraud. My story has become part of legal education programs, ensuring that future attorneys understand the devastating impact of financial abuse within families. The transformation from rejected daughter to successful advocate represents more than personal growth. It demonstrates how trauma can become purpose when channeled toward protecting others from similar harm. Every victim we help recover their stolen inheritance validates the decision to fight for justice, rather than simply moving on and forgetting. As I stand in the same designer kitchen where the story began, surrounded by photos of my chosen family and letters from grateful clients, I understand that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living well and using your pain to prevent others from suffering. My parents created their own consequences through their choices, and karma needed no assistance from me beyond ensuring the truth was revealed. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone who was supposed to protect you? Have you seen justice served when someone thought they could escape consequences for their actions? Share your thoughts in the comments below about family loyalty versus accountability, because sometimes the hardest lesson is learning that blood does not automatically create bonds worth preserving. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding strength in unexpected places. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment than they have been receiving. Thank you for listening to my journey from family mistake to family protector. And remember that your worth is never determined by how others choose to treat you. May you find the courage to seek the justice and love you deserve. And may you always remember that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you were born into.